Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming and being here. We don't have quorum yet, so we are waiting a few minutes for the third person to show up. So it should get started any moment. Thanks for your patience. Well, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for your patience in waiting for us to begin our CPED meeting this morning. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement that Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the Peace and Friendship Treaty signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. And I just want to confirm that we do have quorum. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Chair. I will take over the first process for the election of chair, and then following the election of chair, the new elected or appointed chair will bring us through the process for the election of vice chair in the same process. Any member can nominate any other member. Any nomination just requires a seconder. If there is one nomination and nominations are closed, and they have to be closed by a motion, that person will be appointed chair of CPED. If there are multiple nominations, then we can proceed by way of a secret ballot. And I have printed ballots ready to go if that is the direction of CPED. So without further ado, I will begin by opening the floor for nominations.
Go ahead, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and I think I understood the signals correctly from across the room. I would like to nominate Councillor Cuttle.
And I'll second that. I accept the nomination.
Excellent.
Thank you. Then I will ask at this time if there are any further nominations for the position of chair. Asking a second time, are there any further nominations for the position of chair? And asking a third and final time if there are any nominations for the position of chair. Hearing none, may I have a request for a motion to close the nominations?
Second.
Thank you. I am happy to announce that Councillor Cuttle has been appointed and declared chair of the Community Planning and Development Committee for 2023. I will pass the meeting along to our new chair.
does this work? I just push it and it goes. Excellent. Councillor Purdy for guiding us these past couple years as chair, I guess like 1 year. Yep, thank you so much. So on to election of vice chair. Does the process follow the same as the election of chair?
Yes, that's correct. The same process, but for the election of vice chair.
All right. So are there any nominations for vice chair? Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I'd like to nominate Trish Purdy for vice chair.
Excellent. Seconded by Councillor Smith. Any other nominations? No. All those in favor? Aye.
We would just need a motion to close the nominations.
Oh. Councillor Smith and Councillor Purdy. All right. So congratulations to Trish Purdy. Excellent. We're done. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so to everyone in the gallery, this will be my first time chairing CPED, so I'm going to hopefully make it through this without too many missteps, but yeah, hope it all goes well for us here today. Okay, so we are going to start with item number 2, approval of the minutes from September 15th, 2022. Councillor Austin, there's second by Councillor Purdy. All those in favor? Aye. That is approved. Number 3, approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. I have here that there's one requested addition, and that is item 15.1, Bedford West Park Facilities Plan. Request for added items require a 2/3 majority consent from members of Community Council. So are we all in favor of adding this item? Yep. All right. Done. Do you need an official motion?
Yes,
and
we just
second
need
there?
a motion just to approve the order of business as amended.
Okay, so motion to approve order of business as amended. Councillor Austin, seconded by Councillor Smith. Okay. Due to the large number of items on the agenda, it is advised that the chair inform councillors during the approval of order of business that the chair will be keeping strict order regarding speaking times. Thank you.
I apologize. That's actually a misprint. That was for our last meeting. I included that note. This is not as busy a meeting, so there's a little bit of leeway, but you know, it's not a bad principle in general.
All right, well, I've got my stopwatch up here anyway. Okay, so item number 4, business arising out of the minutes. Is there any business arising out of the minutes? Nope. Call for declaration of conflict of interests. Any conflicts? Nope. Motions of reconsideration? None. Motions of rescission? There are none. Consideration of deferred business? There is none. Notices of tabled matters? There are none. Correspondence, petitions, and delegations. Correspondence. Has any correspondence been received?
Thank you, Chair. There has been one piece of correspondence received related to item 10.3.2. That correspondence has been circulated to all members of standing committee.
Thank you. And petitions. Have any petitions been received?
There have been no petitions received by the clerk's office.
Okay, so that brings us to 10.3, presentations, and we do have a couple of presentations. So we are going to start with the Hubbard's Streetscape Project Placemaking Plan. And we have, I believe, Melanie McIver, the Community Chair of Hubbard's Streetscape Project, and Paul Deck. Hello, good to see you. Do you have, is there a presentation to
Yes.
go up on the screen?
Does this work? Yeah, okay,
Great.
perfect.
Okay, it's all yours.
Good morning, thank you for having us here. We would like to present to the committee about a Hubbard's Community Plan. The Hubbard's Community Plan is a document, a planning document that came out of an initiative from a local community group. So it's a fairly unusual planning exercise in that respect. I would just like to invite you to quickly reflect on what kind of community Hubbard's is. So in Hubbard's, there is a significant commercial development. There is an elementary school, recreational facilities for residents, a waterfront, branches of the library, cultural facilities such as the Shore Club, Sailing Club, post office, churches. There is pretty much everything that would be typically found in a small town, and it has all the characteristics of a complete community. And yeah, with the population, it's very typical for a complete village found anywhere in the Maritimes. What's not typical about it, and is a little different, is that through the center of the community, there's a municipal boundary dividing the community into one side in the Halifax Regional Municipality and on the other side municipality of the District of Chester. The other thing that is not quite characteristic for a community of that kind is that there is essentially almost no active transportation infrastructure on the public streets. There is only a very short stretch of that on the Chester side. So that kind of unique constellation has motivated a group of volunteers, one of those being with me today. They have done amazing work and put a lot of their free time into the Hubbard Streetscape project, partnered with the Espotogan Heritage Trust and raised funds to hire a planning firm, which I'm representing, Upland Planning and Design, to prepare the Hubbard's Community Plan. So when the Hubbard Streetscape project first got involved and formed, the first thing they did is they canvassed all the streets which are showing up here on the map in Hubbard's and talked to residents. What is important for you? How would you like to grow your community? And you can see the results here of this canvassing. So first of all, in terms of themes that residents in Hubbard's are concerned about, the top two items were safety and active transportation. And also one question that they asked everyone at the door is, how do you feel about growth in Hubbard's? As you know, the highway twinning of the 103 is going now all the way to Hubbard's, will be soon completed. Generally, residents feel good about growth, but they are apprehensive about growth that doesn't have a precise plan. So with that knowledge in mind, the Hubbard Streetscape project issued an RFP looking for consultants, and from the beginning they made it very clear they want to have a plan that focuses on two aspects, pedestrian safety and AT improvements, and as well overall community development. There was an extensive public engagement exercise that we ran as part of this plan preparation. So there was a launch week, social media campaign, there were online discussion groups for residents, public online presentations. Most of it was during COVID, so there was a strong online section of it. But we had focus groups with youth, other stakeholder groups, and also as part of the engagement effort, we had a collaboration committee set up with staff from the Halifax Regional Municipality, Chester Municipality, and the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works, who is the road owner. In sum, the engagement confirmed what HSP has already heard from residents during the first rounds of canvassing. Road safety is a very important issue for them, but also generally the character of development. What kind of community will Hubbard's transform in when the growth arrives there? And public placemaking, trail connections, streetscaping, all those things came out during the engagement. So based on that, we started creating a plan for Hubbards. And what we did first is we actually looked at the community structure. What does the structure currently look like? We ignored intentionally the municipal boundary and any property lines, and just looked at what is the fabric of this village? Which areas feel what way, and what could they become in the future? And we arrived at 8 designations that are quite distinct and speak to the character of certain neighborhoods and Hubbards. And this is a much finer grain approach than what we currently have in the planning strategies and land use bylaw for districts 1 and 3, which essentially more or less treat the area from Tantallon west to Hubbards with fairly broad brushes in a uniform way. So we looked at this in a much more detailed approach. And following the establishment of these community designations, we looked at what are the main corridors that people will use in order to get from A to B. And based on that, we have come up with an overall plan that we call the 6 big moves. Some of them have a very strong active transportation focus, so we will be speaking to that later today at the Active Transportation Advisory Committee. For this committee, I would like to focus on the central placemaking and development policies aspects of it. Also, one item that is relevant for economic development as well is something we have been proposing under the name of the Hubbards Loop. So the Rum Runners Trail that runs through the community, the former railway line, kind of just passes on the side of the community. We are proposing this as part of the active transportation infrastructure. It would be nice to have also a branch of that trail going right through St. Margaret's Bay Road, drawing all the bicycle tourists on the main street. But further on to the other 2 points, placemaking and development policies. We have created a conceptual streetscape plan based on the principles that we have established in the public engagement. And in the streetscape plan, we have pedestrian safety improvements, but also quite a bit of placemaking in areas we have identified as vital to improvements for the look and feel of the community. On the image to the left, you can see kind of the most central area of Hubbards, the intersection of St. Margaret's Bay Road with Yacht Club Road and Station Road. That's where the branch of the Halifax Libraries is as well. That itself would be a good location for kind of the central plaza, central little square in Hubbards, because that doesn't exist yet. There is no gathering spot where the community can come together in such a way right now. And bottom right, you can also see the part of the waterfront property. That's the top end of the waterfront property, which is also we have identified as a prime spot to have some streetscaping, perhaps a space for vendors, to create some activity in that area. On the right, you can see some inspiration from other communities' recent streetscape projects that also had a strong emphasis on the streetscape design other than just active transportation improvement. And the other thing we looked at in this plan is for each of these 8 community designations we have created, we have proposed a very detailed planning rules. So for instance, for the designation called the community center, we have come up with Main Street design guidelines that we suggest, which could work very well in a small community of that kind to create and nurture that dense Main Street feeling with a complete compact street wall and stimulate economic activity that way. So that summarizes very briefly the plan, and I will hand it over to Melanie McIver, co-chair of the Hubbard Streetscape Project, to address the committee with the call from the community.
Hi, I'm not sure. Can you hear me okay? Just going to keep my mask on. I have a bit of a cold, and I'm also losing my voice, so I apologize if I need to repeat anything. So as Paul mentioned, our plan initially kind of really was a call for concern regarding active transportation and making us move safely within the community. But it was easily and quickly identified that our community is growing. It's going to grow at a rapid pace. It's already started because of the development of the twinning of the highways. There has been a large increase in property, large plots of land being purchased out there. And we've had the opportunity to meet some of the developers. So I want to speak to that a little bit as well. So when we had the plan created, we knew that it needed to bring forth what the community wanted in the future as well. So with regards to economic development and placemaking, our community is a community where people come and visit and stay. They cycle the Aspatagan Loop, they come and eat at the restaurants, and we wanted to make sure that that was maintained and to kind of capitalize on that. You know, we want it to be an active transportation community. We want to highlight that and encourage people to continue to come, and we need rules and policies in place and also infrastructure in place to support that. So that's really what it was about. It's not just about making a sidewalk, although I feel very dear to that as I have small children, but it's really about kind of molding the growth of Hubbard's as it moves forward to maintain that village feel, maintain that sweet oceanside kind of retreat that people go to, that they want to cycle around, that they want to walk around, that they want to stay in and eat at and stay overnight.
1 minute remaining.
Okay, thank you. So that's why we're here today, and we have these 4 kind of questions or points to talk about. We want to first think about using our extensive public engagement that we've already done to kind of shape the plan moving forward. We really don't want to kind of create any of that you know, when we fatigue individuals by asking them the same questions. We want to be mindful of that. We were hoping that someone in the planning department can kind of be assigned to us or to the project. I am meeting with all of the developers right now, currently myself, that are purchasing land pockets throughout throughout HRRM in the Hubbard side and the municipality of Chester side, and it's a little exhausting. And I think it would be really nice if they kind of saw this plan when they purchased the land so they could see that the community has a vision. All the developers have been amazing. They have been very engaged, and they were very interested in the plan and what it could do for their development as well, and how they could incorporate that into what they were planning. And then what can be done to address the placemaking and streetscaping on St. Margaret's Bay Road? So, you know, we have this little village, we have this sweet little spot, but it is a throwaway a little bit. We want to kind of make it a center, and we want to maintain that center being where it is and not have it shift if one municipality kind of moves forward before another municipality in the plan to kind of shape Hubbard's. And then that leads into the last one. Is it possible to kind of coordinate with Chester with this plan, because they, you know, as Paul pointed out so nicely, there is that county line that runs right in between us that has different taxes, has different rules, has different land use rules, and yet we are a community that goes across that county line, and we'd really like to feel united. And it's a little bit different than most communities in HRM, obviously. So we kind of need help with that as well.
All right, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. Do I have any questions from the committee? Yes. Wait 1 second here, I have to get the speakers list up. There we go. Trish. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you. So just to ask these questions, how do we go about getting answers for the presenters today? Like, if staff would be available to help them with, they've done a tremendous amount of work, and the planning is well on its way. So just needing some help. How do we, what's the next step, I guess, from this presentation to getting a planner, helping them and including their plan perhaps in our grander plan?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think that's something we would probably have to consult with planning staff on. I don't think we have any planning staff here today to comment on it, but it is something we could possibly take away. Yeah, did you have any other questions of clarification for the presenters?
No questions of clarification, but that's a very impressive plan. A lot of work went into that, yeah.
Okay. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. And I was going to say, just to Councillor Purdy's point, I think there's Councillor Mason. If Councillor Mason were here, he could probably speak to it, because I think there's 2 motions outstanding on rural streetscaping that I would think that this could potentially fit into well. You know, the streetscaping beyond the regional center motions. I can't remember off the top of my head what the current status of any of that work is. So it might be enough to, you know, go off and talk to planning staff in relation to this presentation. And if there was a need for a motion, we could bring one out at our next committee meeting. We've done that many times in the past when we don't have something ready on the fly. I would just say, in terms of the presentation, I mean, I think this work is, it's tremendous work, because one of the big things we have to figure out as a municipality is not just, well, we've done our center plan, we have some good policy in the center, but the big pieces that still remain are, what are we going to do in suburban growth, but also how are we going to handle the growth in the more rural parts of our municipalities, like Hubbard's, Musquodoboit Harbor, Sheet Harbor, all these sorts of hubs out there, these little towns within our municipality. We should really, I mean, we need to be thinking about building them up as the hubs in their area. And so what is proposed here, you know, centering things around the library, you know, the placemaking work, I mean, I think that would all very much align, at least for me, where I want to see us go in terms of how we're going to grow and develop in our more rural and suburban areas. So, you know, I think it's really good work. I don't have a question other than just encouragement. And I think as a committee, we can take it away and figure out if we need a motion from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. And, just on Councillor Austin's point, I did a quick look, and the only motion I found, and again, it'd be great if Councillor Mason was here, was the streetscaping program for suburban commercial main streets. But I feel there was something for rural. I feel that there was another one for rural as well. But yeah, that's a good one. I think that could connect with this. So. One, thank you for being here and for the presentation. You know, taking the time to do that work, I think is commendable, and it's excellent to see here today. So my question for you, and then I have a general question for the committee. So I'm just wondering, what has been your engagement like with the District of Chester? Have you had discussions with them? Have you been successful or not successful?
Yeah, so Chester was part of the collaboration committee, and we also presented in Chester last Thursday to council about the plan, both aspects, active transportation and community building. So they're well aware, and they're also in the same boat as you are now, trying to figure out how to operationalize that and how to make it work. They already have some actually infrastructure initiatives in the works on that side of the municipal boundary.
Okay.
Sorry, I think one of the important things is, as Paul mentioned, this is a community-led project, so we did write grants to get the funding, come together as a community to do it. And as we try to move it forward as a community, I think one of the hardest things and most important things is that somehow we need the municipalities to be united on the same front, because if one municipality moves forward before another, there is a chance that the center of Hubbard's could shift, essentially, given that if it's absorbed quicker, the land on the opposite side will be purchased at a higher rate, you would assume, than on the other side of the county line for both sides. So I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that we have as a group, is to making sure that as it moves forward, because I know the community will continue to push, they're very passionate about it, that it happens at in a collaborative manner and a rate that is almost the same, just because there are differences across the side. And I just wanted to highlight that because it's one of the hardest things to coordinate as a volunteer, I would say, because we have different things on each side to consider.
Right. No, thank you for that. For the committee, so a lot of times when we receive presentations, we do kind of like an automatic motion that refers it to staff for comment. I'm not sure if the committee wants to do that, or would we rather just wait until next committee and have a more fleshed out motion? Yeah, okay. So are you saying wait for a more fleshed out? Okay, all right. Right. All right, so how about we, I put a motion on the floor to refer the presentation to, I'll just say staff. I'll say planning. I don't want to put it too constricted because it might involve some other departments, but I can say planning because it is planning, but I personally rather keep it a little bit open to make sure that everybody gets to touch it if they need to. CAO, refer the presentation, today's meeting to the CAO for response from staff, something along those lines. Does that make sense? Look at our, request for staff report. Okay, so refer the presentation from today's meeting to the CAO for a staff report to investigate moving forward. Supporting moving forward. Sorry, Simon. No. This is why we don't do motion on the fly. But when we do get presentations, we usually just kind of do a general send this to staff for comment. Okay. I'll just wait for Simon to see if he was able to put that together.
So just to share what I have on my screen, I have that Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee refer the presentation to the CAO for a staff report to support the Hubbard streetscape on how to
Move forward. Okay, I think that's fine.
That motion was put by Councillor Smith and seconded by Councillor Elhit. Are there any questions or comments on the motion? No, I have a comment then if there's no other comments. So, I mean, I think what's happening here isn't unique to Hubbard's. You know, there's communities across HRM that are in a similar position where you have community-led groups putting together these fantastic plans for looking at the development of their communities and their villages, you know, with a vision and also an appreciation that they are growing and they need some direction. You know, what I love about this plan is, you know, it's, you know, being a planner, of course, it's like, it's awesome. It provides the framework around which the community can grow and develop. It, you know, provides the structure and the shape and creates the functionality. It has all the ingredients of a complete community. And, you know, kind of strengthening the community identity and creating opportunities for civic life. So I just want to say, like, really, really well done. You know, it's actually what we aspire to in so much of our rhetoric around what we want to achieve, but when it comes to our rural and suburban communities, we don't seem to have the processes in place to move forward. So I support the motion for this one, but I would put this out to the committee that perhaps we think a little bit more about this and how we come back and look at a broader approach for communities across the HRM to provide that support, because we know our planning resources are stretched. And when you have community groups who, you know, not only have the knowledge and the passion within them, but then raise the funds to go out and hire, you know, people like Paul Deck, who's done such wonderful work around the municipality. Like, you know, if anyone's ever seen the work he did in Dartmouth, Main Street there, you know, it's, it's what we need. It's the kind of vision and the kind of work that we need here for our communities. And we just don't know how to incorporate that into our plans and move it forward. So I will support this motion, and I think we have some more work to do in looking at how we support other communities as well, to help accelerate this, because there's a timeliness to this, right? There's the development is happening now. It's not happening in 5 years' time. Like, now's the time you need to get the plan in place so that as projects emerge, you can, help guide and shape them to create a cohesive community. So, yeah, I'll think about all those things as we move forward with this. Okay, should we have any other comments? Oh, Tim.
Turn that up. I was going to do exactly what Lindell did and propose a motion, so I was happy to second it. So I was happy to second Lindell's motion. I was going to bring forward one myself, but I'm fine with his. I'll support that, sure.
Okay, excellent. Call for the question. Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Excellent. Well, there we go. Hopefully you'll be hearing from us sooner rather than later. Which brings us, okay, Mr. Chair, I'm going to have to get organized here. Which brings us to our next presentation. Here we go. Our next presentation, item 10.3.2, Halifax Public Gardens Proposal. And we have Robert Pace, Chair of the Board of Public Gardens Foundation. Welcome, Mr. Pace.
I'll turn off my microphone.
The floor is yours.
Well, Madam Chair, congratulations on your election today. And I must say, Simon is pretty efficient in running elections. You should move to the United States. Listen, the proposal's up. My name's Robert Pace. I'm a lifelong resident of HRM. Presently reside in Seabright, Nova Scotia. I was quite interested in the Hubbard's proposal there. It's close by. My association with the gardens goes back to when my grandmother, when I was 5 and 6 years old, used to take me on the weekends to the gardens, I think, to free up time for my mother. It then morphed into my wife and I getting our wedding pictures taken in 1980. And then fast forward to Hurricane Juan back in September 29th, 2003. I came up with the concept of running a radiothon on our 24 radio stations to raise $1 million in one day for the gardens, and then work with Peter Bigelow, who was at the time at HRM, and we raised another $1 million, and we restored the gardens from October 1st for a grand opening on July the 1st. A lot of effort. I used to chair a weekly meeting at Smitty's across the street from the gardens. A lot of commitment, a lot of volunteers, and a lot of worthwhile things were done. In one, and we actually say it in the book that I've authored with 2 other individuals, the hurricane in some ways was a bit of a blessing because there was an enormous amount of deferred maintenance at the gardens. We can talk about that history at some other time, but we used the opportunity to actually put a whole roadmap master plan together to identify where drainage systems were, brooks, electrical outlets, and so forth. And so fast forward 20 years, pandemic, I was sitting down with a couple of colleagues, and we said, took a walk through the gardens, and there was a lot more activity there because we were all looking for going out and staying safe. We should get a good history of the gardens written. So we commissioned some MA, PhD students down at St. Mary's University and worked through the pandemic. And we've got this book now, the Halifax Public Gardens, which is now on the shelves. And it outlines the creation of the gardens, the destruction of the gardens, and the restoration of the gardens. But on reflection, and I guess during the pandemic, we all had a lot of time to reflect, we said, well, we should put something in there to talk about the future of the gardens. So I encourage you to go to the final chapter, and we kind of lay it out that, you know, the unsightly greenhouses that have been there for 50, 60 years across the street, we should step up our game and build a public greenhouse that people can go in, you know, every day of the year and see how a greenhouse works. Very similar to what Acadia University did at their environmental center. Some aspects of the greenhouse are private for various reasons, for research or whatever, but then most of it is open to the public. So that was our concept. We wanted to put something forward, and then we launched the book, and so I thought I better get ahead of it before the book comes out. So there's obviously, as the slide says, there's a need. I must commend HRM. You've done a heck of a job restoring the superintendent's house there. It's beautiful. But it's sitting next to rusted seed containers, you know, trucks, equipment. So with the population increasing as it is, we should have this opportunity to really make this a world-class facility. And I think the opportunity's there. And I say that because I don't want us to sort of let it slip by when you've got the federal government, the provincial government with infrastructure funding for these kinds of activities. So I started having those meetings. So I have met with the local MP, with the federal minister, Sean Fraser, with Dominic LeBlanc, the Minister of Federal Infrastructure, and they're enthusiastically would support contribution. However, it was made very clear to me by those three people that you have to start at the province. So I had 2 meetings with the province, and I got the same favorable, enthusiastic response. So the people that own the land are sitting in this room. And so the step now is to get your commitment for $2.5 million to move forward with this, but also create a working group that will basically repeat what we did 20 years ago. It was very effective. City participated, Parks Canada participated, local people, Friends of the Gardens, and so forth. So the concept is basically taking the triangle that forms the superintendent's house and the existing greenhouses and the lawn bowling facility and fixing and beautifying that whole triangle, whereby you would have a 10 or 12,000 foot greenhouse open to the public, and we would have an underground area under the greenhouse that would accommodate all of the mowers and trimmers and tractors and that kind of activity that's utilized at the gardens. So that's conceptually the idea, and it would be very similar to the picture there on the right. It's a Victorian era greenhouse. You would see them, a similar thing at Allen Gardens in Toronto, or Kew gardens in the UK, but it's that kind of quality, and something that looks majestic would be, in fitting with what's presently there. I outlined the investment. It's a total of $8 million. I feel very confident with the federal government, provincial government, and I would raise $500,000. My difficulty to raise the $500,000 is I can't go out there and raise money until I have a commitment that this is going to be a project. When council consider this and approve it, then I can easily raise the money. So we have a timing challenge. So what I'm looking for today is for council to support the concept, the vision, and to commit for $2.5 million, and as well set up a working committee that we can come back with, more detailed drawings, concepts. There's operational challenges, answers that have to be answered. And then the final thing is to also look at the governance of the gardens, which has always been a back and forth. Historically, years ago, a superintendent was hired, and he controlled the gardens, and it was more independent of Parks and Grounds. And I'm suggesting if we go ahead and do this kind of activity, we should really think about this, because if you had it, and I'm not saying that's the answer, but I think you got to get smart people from the legal profession to come in and say, okay, what are the opportunities? You could put it in a foundation. If it was in foundation, you could continually get program funding from the provincial and federal governments to help with, education in the gardens with students. I must say, one of the interesting, and there's a model for this, Niagara Parks Commission in Ontario run their park, and they run a school. The Premier actually was intrigued by the idea of using the horticultural college and students and doing a co-op, program in the gardens. So, there's those things that a working group can walk through, talk through, and so those are basically, I think, the highlights that I'd like to bring to your attention. I'll take any questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Tim?
Thank you for the presentation and obviously for your work, past and present. Appreciate that. You're in luck today because we have the Executive Director of Parks and Recreation sitting in the CAO's chair up there. So I think what she would probably say, and I'm going to actually refer this question over to her, Bob, is because I think this committee can certainly support the vision. We don't have the authority to make any financial decisions or any governance decisions, if you will. We would have to make a recommendation at some point to the CAO and then to regional council as a whole. The other thing is, and I noticed in addition to this vision and the 2.5, which would be HRM share, then we have to also look into operating costs of this, which could be significant. So I'm going to hand this, I'm going to ask, Madam Chair, if it's okay to ask Executive Director McDonald, if what would be the next best step? I mean, I assume this is not in your operating or your capital plan right now for the budget that's coming forward in a month or within a month. So I'm just sort of wondering what you might advise as far as timing and process for this.
All right.
Through you, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair, to the member. I think in this instance, it would be helpful for staff to have a motion, which would give us direction to do a staff report. I know that Councillor Mason has been in touch with staff as well around a potential motion. We have some sort of direction around the common master plan and the Wanderers block, but certainly specific to the funding opportunity, it would be helpful for staff to have that direction. So.
Just to continue on, is that something that Councillor Mason is working on through you and would bring to council, or do you want something from here? Would it be helpful?
No, would certainly appreciate, in terms of timing, I think because there's no Community Planning Economic Development Committee meeting in December, it would be appreciated to have the direction.
All right.
Now, yeah.
All right, I don't know if others want to speak, but I'm happy to come back and just a motion for a staff report on how to proceed like we did previously. I'm happy to put that on the floor if it's helpful.
Yep, there are a few other speakers.
So
Should we
let
hear-
others come back, but that's probably the logical next step, so.
Okay, great. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So I am going to be speaking for myself and then for proxy for Councillor Mason, who's in Ottawa. So for me, I want to thank you for being here. I just have two questions, actually maybe three. So the $8 million that was referenced, just curious on what you use to kind of determine that $8 million as your baseline. Also, I wonder if you can just speak a little bit more on the 30-day governance working group. And I'm happy to elaborate more on that if you want to know what I'm looking for. And also the timeline that you're looking to get this approved. I think I saw in the presentation it was 23, but just want you to confirm the timeline that you're hoping to see an approval to move forward.
Yeah, the timeline is hopefully the summer of 2024.
Okay.
So we'd use this winter to get, the plans in place, and then construction, after that, opening 2024. On the governance aspect of it, I just think it's a very opportune time when we've got the focus on the gardens, the challenges facing the gardens. I think it's just a good idea to take a fresh look. Open minds, get 3 or 4 people from HRM, 3 or 4 people from our organization or the Friends of the Gardens or whatever, and sit in a room and look at all possibilities. Nothing may change. Status quo might remain, but let's look at some optionality. I'm looking at it from a point of, down the road, it's always more challenging to find operational funding, capital funding, but if you can broaden your organization so that it's easier to look at federal or provincial continual funding, I think having it set up properly would be helpful. On the question of the size, the very first business I ever was involved in was landscape construction. I put myself through university, painting houses and landscaping, and then I got into the company's Evergreen Landscaping. My brother still runs it. This council named a street Evergreen Landscaping off the Prospect Road. It was a councilor, dear friend of mine, Ron Hansen, at the time. So it was the background that I have. I've talked to other institutions like the Gardens in Toronto, and that was, Peter also reached out to a couple of engineer, architect people that he knows, and that's conceptually what I think is viable.
Thank you. So Chair, I'm wondering, do you want me to come back to speak on behalf of Councillor Mason, or should I just do that now?
You still have time, so we can do that now.
All right, sure. So I'm just gonna, he sent an email just asking us to, asking someone to read it into the record. So he's currently in Ottawa for the Green Municipal Fund, so couldn't be here today. So I'll just read it. I met with Mr. Pace, and this is an exciting proposal, and I support looking at it, but have 2 thoughts. First is the other tenants and users have not been consulted and need to be. We have an outstanding request from Lancers that needs to be considered. The Wanderers FC and the Land Bowling are both working towards proposals. So we need to make sure we ensure all voices are heard and the end result accommodates all of the users' needs. Second is the timing of the capital ask. I am skeptical of being able to fund this in the coming year, but if we can do it over a couple years, starting 2024, I think it may be doable. A motion, he wrote a proposed motion, and I'll just read it. I won't put it on the floor, but I'll just read it for consideration. A motion like this could be considered by the committee, maybe not today, but at our next meeting. So the motion reads, again, I'm not putting on the floor, just for thought, that the Community Planning Economic Development Committee recommends that Regional Council to direct the Chief Administrative Officer to, 1, engage with other tenants, stakeholders, and the public to obtain feedback on the project as presented at the November 17, 2022 CPID presentation. 2, prepare a staff report assessing the proposal for incorporation into further development of the Wanderers block within a context of the 2022 Halifax Common Master Plan as approved in principle and identifying possible funding sources. So that's Councillor Mason's email, and if folks are interested, I can come back and actually put that motion in the record if committee wants that. So,
All right, thank you, Councillor Smith. We have a couple other speakers, so why don't we do that first? Councillor Purdy.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank you as well. It's amazing when people take ownership of something that is near and dear to their heart and what amazing things can be done through that commitment and concern. I'm in support of the motion. My concern, of course, is the funding aspect and what the effect that will have on our taxpayers. And I've been told by many different folks in our organization that it's going to be a pretty difficult, hard budget season in terms of what the consequence, the result's going to be of all of the inflation and budgetary pressures that the world is going through right now. So so what Councillor Mason sent in through Councillor Smith there with the realistic not being able to do anything this year, I agree with, because I think the pressures are going to be immense. Your suggestion about a foundation of some sort and how that could potentially ensure repetitive funding from higher levels of government is interesting, and I think that's something that could be very beneficial to look into how that would play out in our future for the public gardens. There's such a special, magical place right in the heart of our city. It's good to look at future planning to ensure that it stays that way. The other concern I have just with the Wanderers block and that, like, we know that the Lancers there in that very small piece of land that they have really need to expand. So I wouldn't want to see us do anything that make a motion that could potentially block that potential expansion for their amazing outreach to the community and to honor their history there. So maybe, Maggie, would that impact the Lancers' potential for expansion? This motion?
Maggie?
Through you, Madam Chair. The motion gives us the opportunity, firstly, it directs engagement with other stakeholders, so that's, I think, gives that opportunity to have that discussion. As well, it gives the opportunity for staff to incorporate any impacts on other stakeholders into a staff report. So we would assess that through the process.
Okay. So there's no risk then? No risk?
I think in the staff report, like I say, the staff report gives us the opportunity to identify any impacts, and then it comes back to council for a decision.
Okay, I understand. Okay, thank you. And thank you again.
All right, thank you, Councillor Purdy. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and I just want to chime in. I was thinking the idea at the conservatory, I spent some time out in Calgary years ago, and what I jumped to right away was Devonian Gardens there, right? And what that means in that city. In the winter, it can be kind of bleak, kind of gray. I know certainly when I met my wife when I was out there in Calgary, and she felt rather betrayed because I brought her out here in August, and then when February rolled around, she was a little upset with the gray, shall we say, of it all. So, I mean, an indoor space, I think it could be a lovely treasure to the city. I mean, our greenhouses, certainly when we do the open houses for them, it's always well attended. It could be it's a lovely idea, especially too if we can have provincial, federal involvement. I think a question actually, if I may, Ms. Chair, for our director and maybe Simon. Councillor Mason, he referenced in his email that his motion, he'd been in discussion with staff. So have you folks already been working with him on that motion that Councillor Smith?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. Staff were aware of the motion and helped to craft that.
So, I mean, I think committee, then that's our path forward, is we go forward. I heard their director say that it would be nicer to have a motion now, since we're not going to have a meeting in December. And we have one from Councillor Mason there that staff have had some input in, and I think that's where we go. I would echo the challenge on this site. I mean, this is a lovely idea. The Lancers have a lovely idea, and the Wanderers have a lovely idea. The challenge is finite space and trying to make all these three work together. And I see I've sparked a question. Have you already been chatting with some of our groups offhand as a community thing?
Well, I'll make 2 points. The financial challenge was raised. I'm a financial guy. Matter of fact, I used to chair the Halifax Forum Commission, and I sat here and convinced the council at the time that in order to do the restoration, we've got to do huge bingos. That was back in 1979. So I understand we turned a deficit of $250,000 into a profit of $250,000 for the city at the time. So I'm very sensitive to the question you raised with respect to finances, but I'll keep this simple. This land is owned by the city. These facilities are operated by the city. This proposal, the capital, is less than 30 cents on the dollar that I'm asking from the city. So the leverage here to get a brand new facility owned by the city at 30 cents on the dollar, I think your CFO here would jump at that. That's the financial consideration. The only worry that I do have, if we hit a recession, hopefully not, maybe this is just a speed bump. The money that I've lined up from the province and the feds, or if those people change office, that gets troubling. So I have a sense of urgency here, because I've been on these things before. People change jobs, and then all of a sudden, you don't have the same excitement about it. So I hope that answers your question.
Could I just ask if you discussed any of this with Wanderers or Lancers, or is that,
No.
Frankly, it's our job, right, more so than yours, but I'm just curious if there's been any conversations there.
One conversation that I did have, in order to make this, viable and sensible, the lawn bowling has got to move. So I have convinced the province that they would lease a piece of property, which I explained to Councillor Mason, where we could move it. That would allow this whole thing to be beautified, and then at some point, you can assess what the Wanderers are going to do or what the Lancers are going to do. But it doesn't make sense to have the lawn bowling where it is right now. Regardless if you're a Lancer, a Wanderers, or Public Gardens. So I anticipated the challenge here, and I've opened up the door, and those discussions will take place.
Okay. Well, I'm happy if Councillor Smith wants to come back with that motion. I'm more than supportive. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Councillor Austin. Back to you, Councillor Smith.
Just looking at, did you have any comments before I put the motion on the floor? Are you good?
Actually, I do have a comment, thank you. I was going to wait till you put the motion on the floor for my comment, because part of it is wanting to see the motion, to see in the motion where, listening to you read it, I wasn't sure what it said about the governance structure. So why don't you put the motion on the floor, and then we can continue the discussion.
All right, I move that the Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee recommend that Regional Council, I think I'll read it, but I think there's a mistake there, Simon. I'll start over it. That Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee recommend that Regional Council direct the Chief Administrative Officer to, 1, engage with other tenant stakeholders and the public to obtain feedback on the project as presented at the November 17, 2022 Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee presentation from the Board of the Halifax Public Gardens Foundation, and 2, prepare a staff report assessing the proposal for incorporating into further development of the Wanderers Block within the context of the 2022 Halifax Common Master Plan as approved in principle, and identifying possible funding sources. Moved.
Okay, that is seconded by Councillor Elhit. Any other comments, Councillor Smith?
No, other than I think with discussion we had today, this is a good motion. Obviously, timeline is a concern for what this means on getting this approved or not. The other piece, to just before you speak, Chair, because you mentioned it, the motion says accessing the proposal for incorporating it to further development. So I wonder if that would cover that governance piece. But again, you could probably add it to be more pointed to that. But other than that, support it. Nothing, no further comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Smith. Yeah, so I mean, what a wonderful proposal. You know, I too like the Botanical Gardens, the Kew Gardens in Toronto. You know, they're wonderful civic spaces, and I greatly appreciate the time and investment you've made into creating this wonderful civic space in our city, the Public Gardens, and as well as this proposal for the greenhouse. I think it's wonderful. I mean, you know, to Councillor Purdy's point, I mean, money is an issue, and it's not that 30-cent dollars aren't appreciated. It's just that when you have several projects at 30-cent dollars, choices need to be made, because it does add up, and so that is a serious consideration for us this year moving forward. But I look forward to the staff report in coming back with looking at options for funding, not just from how we might do it from the NHRM perspective, but what those other sources of funding might be. The ongoing operations of it is another consideration. You know, I don't know if there's any revenue generating opportunities, which I think when you kind of start to look at those models, the governance of this project becomes really important, because there's a lot more agility in it being run by a foundation or some other governance model than we have at HRM, I think. So, you know, that's interesting, but there's also some pitfalls. You know, I think about Long Lake Provincial Park out in Spryfield, run by a community organization that has zero operational funding. And, you know, it burdens the volunteers not only with managing operations, but also fundraising, which I think is, you know, really unfortunate. So, you know, understanding both the governance piece and the funding piece and the operations piece is critical to this, should it, you know, be recommended to move forward in consultation with all the other stakeholders. So I would like to put an amendment onto onto Councillor Mason's motion via Councillor Smith, that we do specifically include in that staff report looking at potential governance models for this facility and the public gardens as a whole, as well as potential financial or funding opportunities. I didn't word that very well, Ross. I don't know if you have some better words for me.
If it pleases the committee, I have a possible amendment here, that the motion be amended to read, 2, prepare a staff report assessing the proposal for incorporation into further development of the Wanderers block within the context of the 2022 Halifax Common Master Plan as approved in principle, and identifying possible funding sources, comma, and exploring governance models for the public garden as a whole.
Great. I hope that's a friendly amendment.
Before I say it's friendly, I'll just look at Maggie. Does that change the content in context of the report at all, adding the governance piece? Because that's a little bit outside of the proposal, but at the same time, it's the proposal that we're seeing today from the board.
Through Madam Chair to the councillor, just a couple of comments on that. One, I think there's potentially a timing challenge associated with having full consideration of the governance structure in time to consider the funding piece. That said, I think, we're certainly, we have a couple of opportunities to do that. One, to the extent that it influences the funding proposal, we'd certainly be trying to incorporate that into the report. We do have a couple of outstanding motions related to park stewardship and committee governance of parks. So that's another opportunity that we have to speak to the governance of the public garden specifically. This said, if committee wants to direct us to consider the governance in the context of this piece, we would just take that away, and whether we come back with it all together or whether we have to stage it coming back, staff can make that determination as we work through.
Okay, so
certainly an openness, but.
So in short, we can include it, but if you can't focus on the governance piece, you would just come back and say that we focused on the proposal and we're working on the governance in another way. Okay. So in a nutshell, the timeline won't be affected to look at the proposal, because if you realize as you're working through it that the governance is too much, you're going to focus on the proposal. Okay. All right. Yeah. So then that's a friendly then.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Outhitt. Second that amendment. Do we need to do a vote on the motion as amended? Yeah. Okay. I call for the question. Okay. All those in favor? And that passes. Thank you so much, and good to see you both. Okay, so this brings us to item 11, information items brought forward. There are none. And we'll move on to reports. We'll start with item 12.1.1, proposed 2023 meeting schedule. And I will hand that over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing very detailed from me on this. The schedule has been distributed. It's a proposed schedule. Meeting dates are all subject to change at the need of standing committee. Those are just intended to give a little bit of order and structure to our LA team and to the public through the year. So if there are no immediate glaring issues, our recommendation in the clerk's office would just be to approve the schedule today.
Okay, does someone want to put that on motion on the floor? Well, I've got Councillor Smith on the buzzer here.
Just a quick question. So as we move forward, I know that we've been kind of intertwining virtual and in person, depending on busy schedule, non-busy schedule, big items, small items. is that something that we're still able to do in the future, or what is going to be our policy moving forward?
I think at this time, standing committees have some flexibility. The clerk's office is able to, at this point, accommodate both options and relatively flexibly as well. There's certainly a merit, I think, towards where there's not necessarily a very big meeting. Maybe something very small and technical has to be approved, and not a lot of discussion that sometimes is easier to accommodate with a virtual meeting. That said, it's I think the chair would retain general decision-making regarding the form of the meeting. So I don't think that anything locks you in today to either option.
Okay, thanks. Good.
All right, thank you, Councillor Smith. Does anyone want to put that motion on the floor? Councillor Purdy?
I move that the Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee approve the proposed 2023 Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee meeting schedule as outlined in the staff memorandum. So moved.
All right, seconded by Councillor Austin. All those in favor? All right, and that passes. On to item 12.1.2, Councillor appointments to boards and committees. I have on here April Doucette.
I don't think April is here today, but I can speak to this. This is just require an appointment from CPED to Executive Standing Committee. It can be any member here appointed today. So we have secret ballots if there's a lot of people that are desiring to be the representative on executive standing, but otherwise we would just require a nomination, much like nominations for chair, and then a vote to close nominations.
Okay, so I will make a call for nominations then to appoint someone from CPED to the Executive Standing Committee. Are there any? Oh, there we go. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. And I guess just kind of looking around the room, like I've had no conversation. I can't even remember who our previous executive nominee was. It was Lisa. And so she's not here today, and I haven't heard from her. So I have no idea if she wanted to continue, but I have an eager fill-in sitting next to me with bated breath, so I'm happy to nominate Councillor Purdy. I can say emphatically, I do not want to do it, so.
Okay. Any other nominations from the floor? I actually have some interest in it as well, so I'm going to nominate myself if I may.
So we would just need a seconder for the, I think, the first nomination, and then we can consider other nominations at that time, I think.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Unless that was seconded, I didn't notice.
Okay, so Councillor Smith seconded Councillor Purdy's nomination. And, all right, Councillor Smith seconded my nomination as well.
So that would mean that we have two nominations at this time. Those are Councillor Purdy and Councillor Cuddle. If those remain open, we can distribute ballots and hold an election for the position. I should pause and just ask if there are any other nominations at this time. Seeing none, I won't call 3 times to that. I don't think that's required in this case. But otherwise, then I will pass along secret ballots.
The drama. The drama. Oh, you didn't watch council with all the secret ballots? And then the ties? Because Councillor Cleary wasn't here, so we had a couple of ties. And there were ties.
Okay, I should have watched. What did John do when there was a tie?
And we had to have like revotes, or we were gonna pull names out of a hat, or there were like all kinds of, apparently pulling names out of hats is the way they decide ties. In fact, there's been MLAs in BC, came down to a tie in an election, and they pulled a name out of a hat.
Fortunately, with 5 ballots, we can't have any ties today. The successful appointee candidate is Councillor Cuttle.
Oh, yeah, thank you, and like, thank you, Councillor Purdy. You know, I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you. Okay, on to item number, and thank you, colleagues. On to item number 12.2, members of standing committee, none. 12.3, community design advisory committee, none. 12.4, heritage advisory committee, none. 13, motions, none. 14, in camera, we have nothing. And now we're on to the added item of item 15.1, Bedford West Park Facilities Plan. And we have Stephen Cushing here listed for doing on this item. Stephen Cushing here? Oh, okay, I thought there was a presentation. Do we want a presentation on this? Yeah?
I'm familiar with it. Pam is, but I don't know if the others are.
What, how does the rest? Any desire for presentation? Yeah, okay, good. Me too. Okay, excellent. And look, we have someone here with a presentation to go, so I think we should, I think we should see it.
Not shall we say the most absorbent at the time.
Right. Okay, over to you, Mr. Cushing.
Good morning, committee. My name is Stephen Cushing. I'm a landscape architect in Parks and Recreation Policy and Planning. I'm here to give you a brief overview in the process that went into the development of the park, or the Bedford West Park Facilities Plan. So this park facilities plan has a couple of origins. In 2018, there was regional council direction for a sport court analysis in Bedford West to determine where there were gaps in that service delivery. In 2020-21 budget and business plan, this park facilities plan was added to kind of gather a broader view of the recreation needs in the community. To give you some context, Bedford West is a mixed-use community west of Highway 102, south of Hammonds Plains Road, east of the community of Kingswood, and north of the proposed Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes Regional Park. So I'm sure you're well aware this community is experiencing a fast rate of growth, relatively high residential densities, and a variety of housing types. And this has really necessitated us to kind of look at how the existing residents and future residents are being served by parks. So currently there's 28 park and open space parcels. Many of these are in a pad-ready state or undeveloped. So pad-ready meaning graded with grass, relatively flat area, or undeveloped meaning just left in its forested state. We will be acquiring future lands as undeveloped sub-areas come forward with planning and development. And I will mention that although the community abuts the proposed regional park, the lands, they are undergoing a separate planning and management program, so they're not included in this facilities plan. So an assessment of park needs was conducted with an evaluation of the physical park condition of the existing parcels that we have in our inventory. So what the natural lay of the land is, what it looks like on site, some of the natural features, and what those parcels are capable of from a facilities perspective. In terms of land ownership, we have municipal park and open space parcels. We've included provincial school parcels because we manage some of those facilities and the public has access to those facilities. And there's also some private lands that we lease for the public to use, especially Carney Lake Beach is one of those examples. We've inventoried and mapped all of our park facilities for identifying where there's gaps in our service delivery, which I'll get into in a minute. We're monitoring community growth. We know this is a fast-growing community, fairly unique in that the community is growing faster than we can collect demographic information. So, we know what some of the targets are, and we continue to work with planning and development as sub-phases come forward. And there's guiding plans and policies that we take into consideration that have action items and recommendations for this part of the region. And then public engagement, which is one of those tools that we consider with all these other tools for assessing park need. So engagement was hosted early or a year into the pandemic, so we were limited to online engagement, but we did host 2 surveys, one in February to March in 2021, and July to September in 2021. So I've put some of the high-level, broad takeaways from that engagement. We have a number of park issues, opportunities, and priorities. Some of the issues brought forward were a lack of connectivity between parks, between neighborhoods, a lack of investment in open space, people moving into the neighborhood without many opportunities for them in parks. And then, a number of other issues, wayfinding and signage, overuse, parks seeing wear and tear. Some of the opportunities, things that sifted to the top are just a blank slate in a lot of parks that there could be development, a number of facilities within parks co-located together, things like sport courts, preservation of natural lands, water access, among others. Some of the things that sifted to the top, completion of trail loops to connect communities, to connect parks, opportunities for off-leash at some point within the community, sport courts, access to water, among others. So parkland needs are partially determined by settlement patterns. Parks are important in all of our communities, but generally speaking, the more dense and populated a community is, we know that parks have to be closer together, facilities have to be closer together. But for this community, targets hadn't been set for Bedford West. So given the density, benchmarks similar to the regional center have been established. So to give you an idea of what that looks like and how that influenced our assessment, I have up here our inventory of playgrounds mapped here. Those are the red dots. So the benchmark here is that each residence would have access to a playground within 1,000 meters. So you can see there's some different coloration here. The dark rose color, those residences have access to one playground within 1,000 meters. The light pink there, those residences have access to 2 playgrounds within 1,000 meters. So generally speaking, this community is, I only show the top half of the community for this purpose, but it's pretty well served in terms of playgrounds. But we do see some gaps emerging. That shows up on this slide as just bare patches, white patches. When we zoom into those, we know that some of those are industrial or business areas. Some of those are highway shoulders, highway corridor through the middle of the community. But I've outlined in black where we may see gaps in the future. That's currently a forested area, but it's sub-phase 12 of development. So we know that as that sub-phase comes forward for development, that will have to include some playground service in that area. And so when we overlay some of our other facilities, we know that some of these parks will have to have multiple facilities within them. So we're serving these future residents. And the same thing is true in other sub-areas like sub-area 10. So from those multiple methods of assessment, several findings emerged. That parkland is normally undeveloped through the subdivision process, and so this can be challenging in dense, fast-growing areas. There are some discrepancies between public expectation and anticipated need, and so this is partially due to the fact that residents who moved into this community, they don't necessarily know what the future plans for the lands are. And so we hear of a lot of opportunities that people would like to see, but we have no jurisdiction over those lands if it's, for example, the highway corridor through the middle of the community or private lands that are slated for redevelopment at a later time. Many parks have a single use or limited range of recreational opportunities, and there's interest to see more variety in parks. There's interest from the community for hands-on park development, whether that's community gardening, community trail development, or that kind of thing. We know that designated access to water is limited and largely limited to the existing municipal beach. It's a fairly busy beach, the third most popular beach in the region, which kind of leads into the next point about the overuse of some parks, and that limits the sustainability and comfortable use of those parks. Land ownership and maintenance responsibilities are not always clearly distinguished. We know you'll find later, one of our recommendations is to roll out clearer signage and wayfinding. So this is an example of one trail where we have some remnant developer branding and some existing bylaw information, and it's not overly clear who's responsible for what or where this trail leads. Dogs off leash in parks are problematic, both from the point of view that some people want a place to bring their dogs to run off leash, and some people do not want that experience in parks. Movement between some parks is a challenge, whether it be to ongoing construction, unfinished road shoulders, or a lack of trail connection. Park safety and accessibility needs greater attention, whether it's walkway surfacing, accessible play, lighting, visibility, those kind of things. And lastly, there are a few mechanisms to acquire new parkland from development without subdivision of land. And so this is a pressure that we're beginning to realize that if a multi-unit building goes in with a couple hundred residents, there's no mechanism there to get land or money from those developments. So from those findings, we've conceptualized 14 park enhancements and 11 major park opportunities. The park enhancements, they show up there in red. I know it's kind of hard to see it, but just to give you an idea of distribution through the community, those are the relatively straightforward processes that we can begin to put in the budget and business plan. Things like park signage, seating, completing trail loops, tree planting, water access through floating docks, some finishes like park shelters, and then the things that are straightforward to tender, single sport courts and playgrounds and things like that. The major park opportunities showing up in yellow there, those are the things that are going to take a little more time, that need a little more detail in their evaluation, and they may require a site plan or a park plan to kind of zone in on those areas, especially if there's co-location of facilities together, or if we're identifying a specialized regional draw, whether it's a splash pad or pump track or something like that. And all of these items, they can be revisited over time. We know that the demographics are going to change. We know that things are going to change as the community develops out, especially if there's opportunity for HRM to have a direct land purchase, if there's an opportunity for developer-led finishes, or if there's an opportunity for community to leverage some funding. So in terms of capital budget planning, up until now, there's been no guidance really on a large scale for what facilities should be rolled out over time within this community. So that's what this proposed plan would be doing. There's no immediate financial implication in this report. All expenditures would be brought forward in future budgets and business plans. And because of the scale of what's being conceptualized, it's expected that improvements would be phased over time. So the recommendation before you today is that Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council adopt the Bedford West Park Facilities Plan as set out in Attachment B as the guiding document for future park improvements in the community of Bedford West. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Elhit.
Thank you. I would normally put this motion on the floor, but I've got a black screen here saying no signal. So at some point, if someone could put the motion on for me, one of you, when it comes to your turn, I would be happy to second it. In the meantime, I'm going to make some comments, Madam Chair, if that's okay. I want to start by, first of all, thanking the gang that's gathered here today. They have been pretty darn good at thinking out of the box and communicating with Pam and I and others, and listening to my rants and tirades and frustration of how we built a town without, oh, okay, thank you, that worked too. Built a town, and we unfortunately don't have enough things for the young people and then the youth age folks to do. Just to give you an example, Halloween in West Bedford, you get 300 to 400 kids a door. In my neighborhood, we think it's great when we get between 50 and 100 back in the boom days of my neighborhood, which is now recycling. And so there are definitely young people. Now, it's interesting because you've got the young people and the young families in the single family dwellings and the townhouses and whatnot, but you've also got a significant number of condos and apartments, which generally speaking are people more around my age. So you've got nobody happy. You've got nobody happy in the sense that with HRM, because the little kids are being looked after in the playground, the older kids aren't, the seniors want different things, they want the pickleballs and whatever. So some good things have happened. The developer working with HRM has built a pickleball court in the Brookline area, which I think had some dimensional challenges. How's that for diplomatic? But that it is going to be rebuilt by the and fixed by the developer this year, and I thank Clayton Developments for that. A tennis court has been approved and funded by this council, and that is going ahead, I believe. Sean, going across, Stephen, this coming year, and Pam and I are funding a pump track out of our district capital. So we will see some things, and I shouldn't generalize. There may be some seniors that will use the pump track. There'll be all ages using tennis, and maybe some young people like my daughters who actually are getting into pickleball. So that there are some better days ahead. We also have so a couple questions about the survey, Stephen. First of all, it's silent on this, and Pam noticed this as well, was that Sandy Lake is now a provincial growth area, and they're talking about putting 6,000 units in there. I don't know that it'll be quite 6,000 by the time we look at all the setbacks and this sort of thing to protect the waterways, et cetera. But significant growth will be coming from Sandy Lake, and that will put a further drain on the sort of regional facilities, if you will, in this area, plus the additional needs for playgrounds, of course, within the actual developments themselves. The new schools are an opportunity, and I'd like to hear a little bit more from you or Richard, how you're working with the schools, because if they're building a sports field, at the new, and just to folks know, the schools actually are being built right next to each other, so you're going to have pre-primary right to grade 12 in the same complex, which terrifies me to some extent, but also excites me. And they are going to be building playgrounds, they are going to have a sports field. So what opportunities are they dealing with, if you will, that we then frees up the ability for us to do things? The other thing is that, and this will probably be music to the ears of particularly Nalani and Richard, I still think, and I hope this will come forward as part of your recommendations or what comes out of your recommendations, is that we have got to, in big projects like this, like Brookline, like West Bedford, like Sandy Lake, like Port Wallace, the developers, the CCCs, the dev fees and whatnot have got to do more to help us provide what is the amenities needed for these communities. And I think that they're generally willing to do that. We just need to get cracking on tweaking, if you will, our development fees and our CCCs and our policies. And I think one of the main thing is with these communities such as they are, and with the design of both multis and single family and whatnot, it's the all ages, the changing demographic changes are going to be what we have trouble dealing with. I mean, I turned a sod in this neighborhood for the BMO 4-pad, or now the Bedford 4-pad, whatever we're calling it, HRM 4-pad, in 2009. There was nothing there. We now have kids that have lived in that neighborhood for 8 to 9 years, and they are outgrowing the playground that was put in there at the time of the development. And they're looking for the tennis court, the pump track, the splash pad, the basketball nets, these sorts of things. So, we're running about 9 years behind, but also the needs have changed in that 9 years because these kids are now older. So, but I know Councillor Lovelace will speak very passionately to that.
Yeah, Tim, I just want to say your 5 minutes, sir.
For youth, yeah. So, something I didn't mention was how are you going to make some recommendations on how we can raise funds for this going forward, different projects such as this scale? The number of respondents, I didn't hear that. I might have missed that because I was making notes. And the budget process, I guess, Maggie, for you, when does this start showing up in capital projects other than we know we've done the tennis court and Pam and I are doing the pump tracks? So there are my questions. Thank you very much for this work and your communication, but I hope it's something we learn from as well going forward.
I can start, or Stephen Cushing again, through the chair. I can start, and if Richard or Nalini want to jump in, they can do that. Early on, I met at a very high level with TIR just to kind of get an idea of the direction for the new school, and asked them what we could share publicly, and some of it is in our analysis as well for future service delivery. So we know that there will be playgrounds, sport courts, a sports field. And I can't speak in too much detail, but our Parks Capital folks have been sitting down with them to make sure, with TIR, to make sure that the facilities that are being built are to HRM standards, because some of those HRM will be maintaining. Things like basketball courts, if they're a full-size dimensioned court and sports field and like that. There are some other facilities that we won't be maintaining if they're not acceptable dimensions and things like that. So those things will be coming online more in the short term now, and we have included those in our analysis. In terms of your survey question, we had about 400 responses to the surveys. Where was I going with that? A lot of the survey responses that we got relate to parks on the east side of the community, because at that time, not a lot of people were living on the left side of the west side of Larry UTEC, even though we did have some opportunity comments for that side. In terms of your question about capital cost contributions, we almost see kind of two different routes. First, getting this guiding document in place, because regardless of the mechanism for funding park enhancements, we still have to have a good idea of what we want to roll out over time and what we can reevaluate over time. Another process may be subject to a future staff report, because these are things that are going to be affecting the region as a whole. Any community that has density above and beyond single-family dwellings, we need to figure out whether it's density triggers, capital cost contributions, whether that's something we can handle in-house or if it's a legislative change. It'll need some further evaluation.
Right.
And I see Richard.
Sandy Lake and the 6,000 was what I asked too, the 6,000 units there. But, I can do the motion after if you want to.
Yeah, we have another question. We'll do that first.
I'll come back. Or, okay.
Madam Chair, Richard Harvey, Manager of Policy and Planning. I think there were two things just to respond to. One was the matter of what do the new schools offer by way of amenity, and it is quite true that predominantly the playing field aspect of things is something which we wouldn't have been able necessarily or haven't been able to accommodate through this new subdivision, so that offers substantial benefits, as opposed to things like a sports courts, playgrounds that we would normally be able to accommodate in parks. That being said, when a playing field is built by TIR, it only is built to, if you like, a certain standard, and that standard doesn't allow for a full range of playing field activities that we would normally have. It's associated with a school. There are challenges associated with it. So I just wanted to eliminate those two things. With respect to what I would say is overall growth, the example that West Bedford provides us, that we're able to see what's happening, we start to think about Sandy Lake and other communities. I think it's fair to say that This, if you like, this project helps illuminate that we are going to have to develop better tools should we wish to be able to provide developed parkland as subdivisions occur. So I don't think we have an answer necessarily just yet for Sandy Lake. I think it has its own impacts to its own population should it be developed, and it has other regional impacts upon existing resources. I'm going to take your question as more of a point, if you like, for things that we know that we're going to have to address on a go-forward basis, given the amount of development that we have in the municipality.
No, fair enough. Thank you both. Would you like me to put the motion on, Chair, or? Okay. That I'll move that the Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee recommend that Regional Council will adopt the Bedford West Facilities Plan as set out in Attachment B of the November 14th, 2022 report as guiding document for future park improvements in the community of Bedford West. So moved. Thank you.
All right, that was seconded by Councillor Purdy. And next on the speakers list, I have Deputy Mayor Lovelace.
So I guess he's not going to take his 5 minutes after all. Okay, thank you so much. I'm happy to be a guest here at this meeting. Sorry I was late, Madam Chair. I didn't receive the plan. I didn't receive the report. I haven't seen it at all except for what was presented here. So I'm just basically going by my notes and having watched the presentation. And thank you for that, Stephen. So a couple of things that my colleague, Councillor Outhead, has already mentioned, so I won't go over those again. But I will tell you, Councillor, and thank you to our staff at Recreation, Parks and Recreation. We do have a new playground going in right now in Brookline. So that's really good news. You know, this DA was approved well over a decade ago for Bedford West in the Brookline area. We know that there have been some struggles with the CCCs. It is an inadequate policy to be able to recognize the need for the density that we are creating in this area in regards to providing the parks and the recreation facilities that are required. So we're playing catch up. And this is one of those cases where growth does not pay for growth, because as the apartment buildings go in, you know, there's no subdivision of land. Those buildings are just going in, and there's no cash in lieu. There's no land being set aside for parks. And so we're, in a sense, trying to catch up right now. And many thanks to the staff that are doing that. So, you know, Stephen, to your point, there is no mechanism, right? And that's the problem. So the policy has to change. There is a future staff report that needs to be developed to recognize that, because as we move into the Kearney Lake, Sandy Lake, et cetera, Port Wallace, we have to be able to acknowledge the fact that our policy is not good enough at this point to recognize the need for those parks and recreation facilities. And I think when we look at how we've created that map where you had kind of the recreation facilities and the parks and so on, we also have to think about how people are getting there. You know, they're not driving all throughout the subdivision to find a way to Hammonds Plains Road, to drive along Hammonds Plains Road, to get to Larry Utah, to get into Brookline and so on. And that's part of the problem, is that we haven't looked at the connectivity of all of these different assets that we have, and how easy it is to get from a park, to go to the playground, to go to the pump track, to, you know, all that kind of stuff. So we have to start thinking about how does a person move around these communities to get to these parks. And this is the same problem with our road network, right? We have fingers of subdivisions off of a main corridor without the connectivity. So I just came from a meeting with our HRM Public Works staff talking about the Hammonds Plains Functional Plan. And, you know, that has to play into this as well, as far as how do we make sure people can get to enjoy these assets. I'm disappointed to hear that there was only 400 responses to this. We pushed it out hard. And I'm wondering if there was just a lack of understanding as far as the benefit overall, and how, you know, not that people are disengaged in that, they're just not sure what the benefit is to responding to these. Obviously, it is a big problem. for District 13 and District 16 in that Larry UTEC corridor area. People are frustrated and not feeling like, they have what they thought they would have. The sidewalks, aren't in. The connectivity from the school to the subdivision isn't there. It's not safe to get from the Bedford West area in District 13 to the Bedford West area in District 6, from 16 to 13, 13 to 16, you know what I mean. So I think that while our recreation team is looking at these park assets, I'd like to know, Stephen, how are we taking that bigger viewpoint around the connectivity to make sure that we're making it easier for folks to use these assets? Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think there might have been two questions there. I'll hand the connectivity piece over to Stephen. I think there was a question just about the survey. The survey actually had a very good response, but it may be, and this is completely speculative to me on my part, we're largely talking about a new community that's moving in. There's an expectation. There's sidewalks, there's street trees. There may be an expectation that the parks are actually developed. I would have that expectation without, just being a lay person. So while we have done surveys and otherwise, there may be a bit of a fundamental understanding that the survey is perhaps capturing something or is trying to address something which would be beyond what people would be expecting. So I think what we have to do is recognize that possibly as Councillor Outhit would mention, I think you've mentioned as well, we may be in for some catch-up in many ways, which may be a little bit unfair, but is the circumstance that we find ourselves in with these new subdivisions where the parkland is not completed at a baseline level to what it should be. I'll start with the connectivity piece in the sense that, that there is, some good connectivity that happens. We do work with our AT staff as well to align some of the bike lanes and otherwise. I think some of the local streets serve in that capacity as well. But I'll just hand it over to Stephen if there's any other points about connectivity as well.
Yes, another piece that came up during the engagement was there was a group that is going to be forming itself to be like a Friends of kind of group for Bedford West, and they have a very strong interest in connectivity and trail development. And so now that there's a mechanism internally for communities to apply for some trail funding, I think you'll see some of those proposals come forward. And when you do get a chance to see the attachment B and see it in detail, there's a map on page 14 that talks about, or maybe that's proposed. Anyway, there's a map in there that has proposed connections. And so that's really, those are some of the things that the survey respondents told us that would improve connectivity within the community.
Just one last note, and I thank you so much for that. Again, because I don't have the report, so I guess to staff, I would ask that these kinds of reports, even if a counselor isn't on the committee, to make sure that they have the documentation ahead of time, so that we can look at it and we can attend these meetings as guests and offer our insight as well. And I think also it's a great opportunity to just to kind of get some feedback from the local counselor. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any further comments? And then I just have a couple, very much related to how active transit ties in to overall community networks. And while local roads might serve the purpose of being local street bikeways, it's the walking and the connectivity and getting from point A to point B, which you don't always see the strategy at the subdivision concept approval process. So, I mean, putting in the active transit after the fact, the active transit connectors after the fact is a lot more difficult than when we do this at the subdivision level. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to where, when we're going through the, community, through the planning process and the subdivision process and the conceptual process, at what point does parks get engaged in where parks are located and how it's connected to walking paths or active transit infrastructure?
To the chair, it's right at the outset. So when these plans are actually being proposed by developers, there are team meetings that would be looking at all of these aspects. So I think it's fair to say those elements are probably well looked after. There's always room for improvement. Those parts are well looked after. It's really the park development, I think, that's at the center of this. But those connectivity pieces, as much as there are places of prominence from A to B, linking different areas of the municipality, those are looked after. And then while those are being considered, we'd also be considering where the alignment of parks might be as well.
Okay, great. And I realize it's noon, and we're going a couple minutes over here. Do we need a motion to continue, or can we just finish this up?
I think we can probably, I was trying to play pretty cool, Chair, but I think it's okay to just, where I don't think there's a lot of debate going forward, we'll probably be okay without a motion.
All right, thank you. And I guess my one last question here is, I'm looking at this Bedford West Park Strategy Plan, and it's huge, and there's a lot to be done there. There's many, there's big park opportunities, there's enhancement opportunities, and I'm wondering how this ties in to the bigger strategy for HRM as a whole, and how we prioritize where work gets, given that we have this master plan for Bedford West, how does this relate to the bigger park strategy that we have for the municipality in terms of identifying priority and allocation of funds?
To the chair, at this point, I think it's an excellent point, and it's something that we can take under advisement, because that's in our scope of thinking as well. We have mechanisms such as the regional plan review. We've got a variety of planning documents, but we as well would have been thinking about those things, and will continue to think about them, and may have something by way of those plans or otherwise to reflect back to you as committee and council. So we're recognizing of how these things fit within a broader framework, and may want to come back to you with some recommendations around that as well.
All right, thank you. With that, I call for the question. Okay, all those in favor? All right, that passes. So, on to 16 notices of motion. No notices of motion. Okay, notices of motion. Okay, 17, public participation. Clerk, do we have anybody signed up to speak?
No one is signed up to speak, and just looking at the gallery, I don't see anyone. You may want to just call just to be sure.
Okay, is there anybody that would like to come and speak to Community Planning and Economic Development Committee? Okay, no. The next meeting is scheduled for January 19th, 2023, and with that, I'll ask for a motion of adjournment. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Is that your first committee, like any council committees?
Yeah.
Well done. Yeah.
Well, I've chaired Halifax. I'm vice on Halifax and West, so I've done that a couple of times. Yeah. Yeah. I need. You know what I need?